Players gather to cast powerful spells, some of the oldest and most powerful in the history of Magic the Gathering. Dark Ritual, Entomb, Reanimate, and many others. Battling head-to-head in brutal combat, they all have one thing in common: to uphold their legacy and their search for eternal glory.
The Eternal Glory podcast is brought to you by the minds behind Bosch and Roll on YouTube, Thraben University, and theepicstorm.com. This episode is sponsored by Moxfield and financial planner Nicholas Robb.
Hello, and welcome to episode 144 of the Eternal Glory podcast, multi-track Aetherdrifting. We've already recorded 30 minutes of introduction and banter for the week, available in our supporter-exclusive pre-show. Check out patreon.com/eternalglory to gain access, or join as a YouTube member for the same content on YouTube instead. As always, I'm Phil Gallagher, aka Thraben U.
I am Brian Coval, aka Bosch and Roll.
And I am Brian Cook of the Epic Storm.
If you join our Patreon, you'll join new members, Duff and David S., alongside Boxo Crackers 557, Bird 7, not Eric Schmidt, and Anything Blue. Lots of real names, definitely, in our new members. And all of those people listen to a pre-show where one of our hosts mysteriously disappears for a while. But why? You could find out if you join the Patreon.
To win in Magic, adjust your strategy as the game changes. The same is true of investments. Nicholas Robb, financial advisor and certified financial planner, can help you create a game plan for your financial goals. Call 314-968-3783 or email nicholas.ropp@edwardjones.com. That's nicholas.raupp@edwardjones.com to get started today. Edward Jones, member, SIPC.
If you're interested in advertising to 10,000 plus Eternal gamers every episode, reach out to us. We're always accepting new sponsors. And speaking of sponsors, gentlemen, a past sponsor of ours reached out after the last episode to say that my interacting with them at Eternal Weekend had no bearing in the fact that he dropped our ass. I'm just throwing that out there. Completely unrelated reason. It was probably Brian.
I don't know. That's not what I heard. Carry on. Shout out to Jonathan Sparks.
All right, now that we shouted out some cool people, let's talk about Aetherdrift cards. This was a set that we didn't really hype up too much in kind of preview season. It didn't look like a particularly powerful set, but now we're starting to see some things slip through into Modern, Legacy, Vintage, Pauper, and we want to highlight some of that stuff today, starting with Stock Up.
Hell yeah! This is a 3-mana sorcery for 2 and a blue. You look at the top 5 cards of your library, put 2 of them to your hand and the rest on the bottom in any order. Gentlemen, there's a card that's extremely similar to this. Pieces of the Puzzle. The differences are that Pieces of the Puzzle only gets instants or sorceries, but it puts the cards to the graveyard instead. So it's a little bit different. Pieces of the Puzzle is definitely better in graveyard synergy decks, but it sees no play almost anywhere. It used to be a modern staple in Giftstorm, but no play anywhere else. And when I saw Stock Up, I was like, you know what? I'll buy my 4 Japanese foils because it's a slightly better Pieces of the Puzzle. And I don't know about you, but scrolling through Twitter, I'm seeing people call this the new dig through time. How do you feel about that?
I think that calling this dig through time is outrageous and foolish. This is so much worse. It costs more and does less than dig through time, so calling it dig is not useful. I think that is hyperbolic, and Justin Gennari made that post intentionally as a joke. After he 5-0'd with Stock Up, he made like a power creep joke comparing dig to Stock Up, where the newer card does less and costs more. That's the opposite of power creep. But that said, I think a better set of comparisons is you already shouted out Pieces of the Puzzle, and then there's also Brain Surge, a card that many people have forgotten exists or just doesn't clear the bar. And Brain Surge is a 2 and a blue instant, draw 4, put 2 back from your hand. Stock Up sees one more card, but Brain Surge can change your hand materially in a way that Stock Up can't. Stock Up's a sorcery, Brain Surge is an instant. Setting up the top of the deck versus clearing the cards completely. is a difference that, if you're playing Miracles or something like that, it's better to clear things out of your hand. If you're just trying to get the best cards and get rid of the worst ones, then it's better to stock up. That's like comparing Preordained to Ponder in a lot of ways, or Preordained to Brainstorm. And we have that comparison. Is a Brain Surge that sees one more card at sorcery speed that much better than Brain Surge that barely sees play? I don't know. I mean, Justin Gennari, we shouted him out. I am actually level 1. He 5-0'd a league with Paradox of Outcome featuring 4 stock ups and 2 other cards that we're featuring on the list. He did the content creator speed run of just immediately putting 3 Aetherdrift cards into a vintage 5-0. But yeah, like, this card is one of the best divinations we've had. How good does a divination have to be to clear the bar?
I don't think this one is particularly impressive if you are playing Fair Islands. I think if you are playing Ancient Tombs in your island deck, this is somewhat interesting. So, for example, if you are doing something like Sneak and Show, you can play this and the One Ring and have the ability to make so many different combo attempts over the course of a game. That is exciting to me. You could play this maybe alongside, I saw someone doing the experimental synthesizer stuff, the one that makes you an Urza Saga token whenever you cast an artifact with mana value 3 or more, I think. And stock up was one of their ways to just have more Thoughtcast effects. And they didn't do well in the match, but I liked their deck building.
Where this card is seeing play is actually pretty diverse. It's seeing play in Standard. I did see a Standard 5-0 with this. It's seeing play in Pioneer. It sees play in the Lotus Field combo deck. I actually haven't seen it in Modern, which seems kind of interesting to me, because if it's seeing play in Vintage and Legacy, I would have expected it to find a home in Modern. But right now, Modern is kind of being broken in half by Underworld Breach, so maybe when the dust settles, we'll start to see this card more often. I've seen it in Legacy in at least 3 different decks. So there was a 5-0 posted by, and I'm blanking on the person's name, I was trying to remember it, the one that plays the Riddler all the time.
Killaby?
Yes, Killaby. Killaby posted a 5-0 with 4 stock up in their Echo of Aeons Artist Talent deck. I've seen it in Blue-Green Omnitel, and then a bunch of people right now are trying it in the Delver Secret Shell. However, a tried and true Delver expert that I know is complaining that they couldn't hold open Spell Pierce or Pyroblast with stock up in hand. They're like, why couldn't this be an instant? As an instant, I think this card would be insanely good. But I don't know if it clears the bar for Delver, and what they're trying to do is trim on Wastelands for more real lands to play this, which I don't think plays into the Delver Shell either. So that's an interesting experiment that I don't know if it's going to work, but hey, people are trying.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the best divinations we've had. Your outline of it seeing play in Standard, Pioneer, but not Modern is an interesting one, because Modern is the format where Brain Surge becomes legal. And it's also the format where a card we're going to talk about later in the episode, Malevolent Rumble, becomes legal. And why spend 3 mana for 2 cards when you could spend 1 mana on 4 cards with Malevolent Rumble? The way that card is being leveraged in all sorts of formats right now. I think the Modern Horizon sets unlock a tier of options for stock up replacements from Modern Plus that I think this is going to settle down in Legacy. If you just need to see some cards, you can, I guess, but there's a bunch of ways to do it. And your Delver expert complaining, why isn't this an instant? How important is looking at that 5th card? How important is putting them in your hand versus not drawing them? How good is not clearing the bad cards out of your hand compared to seeing that 1 extra card? Like, Brain Surge exists if you want to hold up mana and then do something like this.
I'm obviously not very much of a Delver player, but my thoughts on the outside versus Delver is that if Delver is playing card advantage, they usually want it to be at 2 mana. And that is the bar where things are scary. Whereas shoving the 3 mana card advantage into Delver, that doesn't feel to me better than just like slamming a Barrogoy for something out of the sideboard, where it's like, all right, deal with this. It'll get me some value over time.
A card advantage breaks in Delver at 2. And it is occasionally appropriate in the meta at 3. Like H.J. Kaiser famously sideboarding 2 copies of Painful Truths in his Grixis Delver decks and had a Mystic Sanctuary where he could just pivot into draw 9 in the mid-game in any sort of mid-range or tempo mirror and bury people in cards. We've seen something like this before.
I was going to make that comparison, but I couldn't remember the card name, so I was Googling Painful Magic card, and you just knew it.
Yeah, I'm in here. I'm ready to go.
So what's our ultimate evaluation on stock up? It sounds to me like this feels legacy playable, but likely not as exciting as the current hype is making it out to be.
I think it's always exciting if a card from a standard release, especially a role player uncommon like this, is even worth discussing in Legacy. So yeah, I'm excited about it. I don't think it's going to revolutionize the Delver shell. I don't know if it's going to maintain 4 of in PO in vintage levels of play, but I think we are going to see this here and there, maybe in that Painful Truth slot, 2 in the sideboard to break the Delver Mirror. And Phil, like you said, Ancient Tomb decks with blue mana. Yeah, the sneak and show with this is sick. This could easily jump off an Omniscience chain out of a show and tell deck. I could see it getting play there.
All right, why don't we go ahead and talk about Ketramos The New Dawn. So this is from the new God cycle. It is 1 white and a black for a Menace Lifelink Indestructible 4/4 that can't attack or block unless there are 7 or more cards in exile. And the important part that we really care about here is whenever 1 or more cards are put into exile from graveyards and or the battlefield during your turn, you draw a card and you lose 1 life.
This has a lot of modern results posted. I did a search on Goldfish for Ketramos The New Dawn filtered by tournament results, and you just scroll and it's just modern for like 6 pages of results. And that makes sense to me. It slots pretty smoothly into the existing Orzhov Sewer deck, which is already a top 5 modern deck and favored by a lot of highly skilled players. They're getting like a draw engine going is really exciting. And there is a combo that is legal in modern, but no longer legal in Legacy after our last ban update, where if you have Ketramos, Dark Blast, and Psychic Frog, you can attack for lethal in 1 hit. You discard the Dark Blast to Psychic Frog, you exile 3 other cards to jump the frog, and then Ketramos draws a card. You replace that dredge with Dark Blast, which dredges 3, and that jumps the frog again after discarding the Dark Blast again. And for every 3 cards in your deck, you could put a +1 counter on Psychic Frog and Ninja Blast your opponent. Like that, there is a loop that exists there. I've seen Domain Zoo adopt that combo, and some Esper mid-range kind of decks come together. There's some stuff to do with Ketramos for sure in modern.
Scrolling through Twitter, I hadn't actually read Ketramos, but I kept on seeing posts about how broken it was. And then I was playing an Epic Storm League in Legacy, and I'm facing 60 card Death and Taxes with the Black Splash. They have 4 main deck Thoughtseize, they had already played 2, and then they slam Ketramos. And I was like, hold on, I gotta read this one, I probably just lost the game. And I read it out loud, and I'm like, wait, I need to read this again. So I read it again, I'm like, so it does nothing. It just enters and does nothing. And I was like, oh, okay. Like I was expecting a much higher impact card out of 3 mana. And I was like, all right, well, this just not doing anything gave me an extra turn that I had in order to win. And then I played another league later on, some days later, and I faced it again. I'm like, I just don't know if I see it. But then again, I'm not a fair Magic player. So maybe in the fair matchups, this card ends up being insane. But it looked embarrassing to me because there's so many other 3-drops that are Legacy playable that I think are just more impactful, that this sometimes card advantage doesn't really fit the bill, but I could be entirely wrong. Like it might be really good in modern. I just question if it passes the bar in Legacy.
So I have played 2 Legacy Leagues with this one. The first one that I did was essentially a port of the black-white blink deck from Modern, just kind of upping the power level for Legacy. And in that video, I was not impressed by the card. I had one just batshit insane turn where I Swords to Plowshare a creature, drew a card, drew a Solitude, pitch cast a Solitude, junked another creature, got a card, hit another removal spell, got a 3rd creature, drew a card. And it is possible to do some really cool things like that. You can also do like Felia blink nonsense, where each time you blink something, you get a card. Every time you tap a Ghost Vacuum, you can send a card to exile and draw a card. It seems like it should be good. And then a lot of times in practice, you're like, okay, I've resolved my 3 mana card versus Delver, and it's currently not online, and I don't have any removal spells right now, so my 3 mana card has done nothing.
Right. The big thing to look at with Ketramos is if we do the basic ceiling and floor exercise of how bad is this card when it's bad. The floor on Ketramos is literally nothing. If you are not exiling things from graveyards or battlefields, this is literally 3 mana, no text. It does not exist as a combat object. There's no other kind of passive ability. There's no... And I noticed this immediately when I saw the card. It's not like during your upkeep, exile a card from a graveyard as a line of text on this. There's no way that this object can get itself going. And it's weird because the modern design of Magic cards, they don't really make you solve puzzles anymore. They kind of just put the whole thing there for you. And there's no passive anything to Ketramos. You must be doing something else before you start drawing a card off it. All of those things are things that Death of Texas does. Like your Felias, your Flickerwisp, your Plows, your Solitudes, you're in overdrive if you're doing those things. But Phil, like you said, if you just rip this off the top and there's not 7 cards in exile, this is a nothing. That said, I have many times in my life lost the game on the spot when my opponent resolved Klothys, God of Destiny, another 3 mana do nothing. And there are matchups where something like this just sitting around will kick in. And, Bryant over there storming off, Phil with his Ancient Tombs. You guys might not know about this, but I'm trying to, put Uro into the battlefield and then exile 6 cards and bring it back and then play it and then attack and do stuff. And something like this, if Death and Texas opponent just resolved Ketramos against me on turn 3, I would know that at some point, even if it's not today, even if it's not right now, I'm going to lose to this.
So I went back to the drawing board and I then tried to do a rest in peace style build where I'm like, okay, what if every card just goes to exile immediately? And that was interesting because then your fetch lands start cantripping, your thought seizes start cantripping. You get an absurd amount of value when you build your deck in that capacity. But the downside is that, you have built your deck in that capacity and you're going to end up with all sorts of Leyline of the Voids, Rest in Peace, Stealthy Voidwalker style cards that are often not really going to be what you want to draw. And despite the fact that you can build a legitimately insane engine with it in that capacity, you just end up with so many clunky and awkward hands that I don't really know that that's worth doing.
One thing that I find really interesting is when you look at Modern, most of these decks are a lot more lean. And then when you go to Legacy, you see some, I don't want to call them bad cards, but people are obviously trying out different stuff. A lot of them are Yorion builds because Yorion's legal in Legacy. I get that. But I've seen everything from Reanimate to main deck Fairy Macabre trying to get Ketramos to work. Phil, do you have any opinions on main deck Fairy Macabres to trigger Ketramos? Do you like the Reanimate package, that sort of thing?
So I like Boggart Trawler style cards that are free-ish to put in your deck and have the potential to fully turn on Ketramos by just putting all of those cards into exile at the same time. I like that sort of stuff. I am less keen on trying to make Ketramos better by putting questionable cards into my deck. I think if you want to build a Ketramos deck in Legacy, the answer is put 1 or 2 into an Esper deck that is just playing Swords to Plowshares, Murktide Regent, Prismatic Ending, just mostly reasonable cards, and plays Ketramos as a hey, if I draw this and it lines up, cool. Otherwise, this is just my endgame 4/4 win condition.
So Brian mentioned Klothys, the Gruul god that saw a lot of play during Standard during that time period in Theros, and it having that upkeep trigger that Ketramos is lacking. That said, you do have the option in this Orzhov-style deck to build your own Klothys at home with a card that I know Brian loves, Emperor of Bonetown. And Emperor of Bones does do that at the beginning of combat, exile a card from a graveyard, which would trigger the Ketramos. I did see a build. It was actually the same person with the main deck Fairy Macabres. I think they were on 3 or 4 Emperor of Bones because they always had 1 or 2 in play or in hand. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's a way that you can leverage Ketramos just a little bit more while not going as deep into the jank tank.
I did that it lined up once or twice over the course of a league playing 4 copies of both. It was not the consistent engine that I was really hoping it would be when I put it together. The problem is that Emperor of Bones is a scary enough card as is that people just answer that. So the first Lightning Bolt, the first Swords to Plowshares, the first Daze or whatever goes on that. And then you got your fucking Ketramos that you resolve the next turn because Emperor of the Bones paved the way. And it's like, oh, shit, now this isn't doing anything.
Right. Yeah, you really want a shell that can make it work without being jank. And I'm just going to read some of the cards in the Modern Orzhov Blink deck that got second place at the Canada Regional Championship. So this is a 13 2-2 record. 3 Emperor of Bones, 4 Felia, 1 Bogger Trawler, 3 Flicker Wisp, 2 Skyclave Apparition, 4 Solitude, 4 Ephemerate are just among the cards that this deck was literally playing anyway. And this looks like an insane place to tuck a couple of Ketramoses. And like this deck is not going fast, and it's in a format that is a little slower than Legacy, and it's built to slow the game down even further. A Hate Bear style deck, a Death and Taxes, a Maverick, something that has the intention and ability to slow the game down to a spot where Ketramos can kick in, and a tutor package like Recruiter of the Guard or Green Sun Zenith for Keen-Eyed Curator. Holy smokes, just Keen-Eyed Curator with this becomes just like pay X, draw X, and it becomes a 7/7 at some point. Like this, there are ways to pop this off, but you don't just like place it into Esper Stoneblade. I'll move on to the next card because I'm excited to read this one. This is the Aether Spark. 4 colorless mana for a legendary artifact planeswalker - equipment. That's a lot of types on a card. As long as the Aether Spark is attached to a creature, it can't be attacked and has whenever equipped creature deals combat damage during your turn, put that many loyalty counters on the Aether Spark. It starts at 4 loyalty, +1, attach the Aether Spark to up to 1 target creature you control, then put a +1 counter on that creature. -5, draw 2 cards, -10, add 10 mana of any color. I am just excited about this as a crazy object to Stoneforge Mystic for. I think that's pretty clearly the use for this in the Legacy case. Like, at 4 mana coming out of an Ancient Tomb, we have Karn, we have the One Ring. That's not really what we're doing with the Aether Spark. Grabbing something this unique and this much of a sidestep out of a Stoneforge Mystic, and it's just castable as well, is really cool.
I don't understand why I would put this in a deck. Like, fucking Cauldra exists that is a 5/5 from hell that is ready to fucking kill opponents. We have Pre-War Formalware as this absolute premium, like, resurrection effect that can be blinked for value later with Yorion and Flicker Wisps and stuff. And I don't understand why we'd want to fart around with the Aether Spark, other than the fact that it's cool. Like, I'm totally down to clown for a league and play the Aether Spark. But, like, in terms of trying to win the game, a +1/+1 counter per turn cycle doesn't sound great in our, 50% combo Legacy metagame that is moving fast. I don't think most, like, Yorion style D&T decks can take super great advantage of 10 mana by the time that they get around to this. And at a -5 loyalty for draw 2 cards, I think we can just do better.
So I agree with most of what you said. I played with the Aether Spark. That video is up on my channel from a couple days ago. If you missed it, you could go check it out. And there were some spots where it was like, yeah, this is mediocre. What really surprised me in practice was how quickly whenever equipped creature deals combat damage during your turn, put that many loyalty counters on the Spark adds up. Because if you just assume nothing else is going on, you tutor this with Stoneforge, you put it in, you plus, Stoneforge is a 2/3, Aether Spark has 5 loyalty. Next turn you attack, Aether Spark has 7 loyalty, you draw 2. Now you're in the Divination Town. And that's on just like the smallest thing. And if you, in the context of like a Death and Taxes, if you just have like a Flicker Wisp plus the Aether Spark, now you have a 4-power attacker, you're divinationing every other turn, and the first turn you have to take off because you don't have 5 loyalty, you can plus and then make the Flicker Wisp 5 power, and then you're divinationing every turn. And obviously if you're hitting for 5 per turn, the game shouldn't take that long. But if you're drawing 2 cards additionally per turn, just by entering combat, that also like make sure that your 5 keeps hitting. And this is templated like Umezawa's Jitte. It doesn't have to hit a player. If you're getting chump blocked, your Aether Spark is cranking up. And like that steady stream of cards in the league that I played with this, which really was just like, let's put one Aether Spark into Esper Stoneblade. I wasn't even really trying to leverage it. A lot of games ended with Kaldra wearing the Aether Spark and just, hit for 5, draw 2 cards, hit for 5, draw 2 cards. It's like build your own Psychic Frog for the low cost of 11 mana or whatever Kaldra plus Aether Spark costs, but Stoneforge Mystic tying it together. And having played a lot of those decks in my life, you're frequently in the spot where it's like, I thought seized a thing, I plowed a thing, my Stoneforge Mystic got lightning bolted, and now I'm just crossing my fingers and hoping I draw the next good card before my opponent does. Aether Spark really does bridge that gap pretty well. It doesn't bridge that gap better than Pre-War Formalware. Also in that league, I had lots of times where I was playing against exile-based removal or playing against a deck that just wasn't killing my creatures, and I had Pre-War Formalware in my hand with no target, where Aether Spark was pretty dope. You can manufacture places for it, and is it worth the deck space? The opportunity cost is the real question, because I think this is definitely a playable card that is not embarrassing in Legacy. It's just, what are you cutting from your deck to make room for it? And is that transaction ultimately embarrassing?
Brian, I actually had a similar rant in a video that I had recently about card playability and how it exists on a sliding grayscale, and not everything is black and white. It's not either playable or it's not. It depends on the context of the deck that it goes into. And I could see a world in which the Aether Spark is playable. That said, I tend to be a little bit more skeptical here, just because the bar it has to clear is Pre-War Formalware, Batterskull, Kaldra. And to me, if you want to add in a 4th equipment, the Aether Spark could be it, but it could also be Umezawa Jitte. There's a lot of playable cards you could play. And what makes this cross the line? You gave a pretty good argument for your card. I believe in what you said, but it's just the opportunity cost, like you mentioned. And I think that this card is better than I initially thought. When you put it in the show notes, I was like, this card isn't playable. And then you just went through your speech, and I could see it now in a deck being reasonable.
Yeah, I think the -10 is flavor text. I don't know what deck would put creatures on the board and get this equipment attached to them and attack and deal damage and then need 10 mana 2 turns after that started happening. But the divination every turn, if you get this on a 5-power creature, and it, like we talked about with Ketramos, how it doesn't have any passive ability to turn itself on. The Aether Spark, the plus does make the creature bigger that it's on. So it is passively both upping itself and feeding itself. And something we didn't even talk about, it's just a planeswalker. You don't even need to equip it to a creature. Like if you put this into play, plus it on nothing because you don't have a creature, now it has 5 loyalty. You could draw 2 cards the turn after that, just try to get the game going. Or if the creature gets killed, you need a new creature to wear it, -5. Now you might have a creature. I think this is better than it reads, but also probably not going to have a long-term home in Legacy.
Also, this shit is $33. I just searched this up and I'm like, I could do some interesting things with this in Commander where I could use the 10 mana. And I'm like, how much? I don't like this $33 much. But if I cracked this out of a pack, I might jam it into a deck to see how it performed.
Right, so you just had the same thought as every other Commander player 4 weeks ago when the set was spoiled. And you're behind the 8 ball on this one.
Apparently. All right, but I am aware of Momentum Breaker. That one is on my radar for vintage purposes. This is 1 and a black for an enchantment with Start Your Engines. That's the max speed thing, where if you have no speed, it starts at 1. It increases by 1 on each one of your turns when an opponent loses life, and max speed is 4. When it enters, each opponent sacrifices a creature or vehicle of their choice. Each opponent who can't discards a card. You can pay 2 colorless mana to sacrifice this enchantment. You gain life equal to your speed. So presumably, if the game goes light, that's 4 speed. But the life is maybe not why we care about this in Vintage.
Phil, is there a broken Magic card that you can put in the starting hand of any game you want to play if you choose to build your deck around it, where looping a Momentum Breaker might be really busted?
Is it Luris?
It is. That is exactly who I was talking about.
Yeah, for legacy players who were around for the companion era, shit got broken real fast. And cards that maybe didn't see a lot of play prior to Lurrus, things like your Mishra's baubles and stuff of that nature, became very, very good as you got to replay those effects repeatedly. And so this is an edict effect that you can recycle while also potentially gaining some life. This feels good. I'm not playing a lot of vintage right now, but I occasionally hear people complain about the mono white deck. And if you have a recurable edict effect, that seems kind of sweet there.
So this is something that I spoke about with one of my coaching clients the other day. He came to me with a bunch of cards that he had some thoughts about for Eternal formats. And let's do the ceiling and floor exercise again. The floor on this is a 2-mana sorcery speed edict, and maybe it Ravenscrimes them if they don't have a creature. The ceiling, of course, is we're just going off with Lurrus. However, it costs 2 mana to cast this card. It costs 2 mana to sacrifice this card. It costs 3 mana to buy Lurrus, 3 mana to cast Lurrus. So we are 8 mana into this thing before it kills the second creature. And that assumes Lurrus has survived. That assumes the game is still being played. I don't know. I frequently don't have that many turns to figure it out versus White Initiative. As far as pumping the brakes on the first White Plume Adventurer to give me time to maybe get up to a Lurrus, I could see it. I think this card is pretty good versus Oath, which is historically a tough matchup for Dimir Lurrus. Getting them to sack that Atraxa, and then you could just wade through the cards as long as they don't have the 7/7 matters a lot. I think that this is not going to find a permanent home, at least not in main decks. But, I mean, we can't disrespect things that work with Lurrus that much.
And on that note, member Lurrus! Iconic comic and Magic artist Steve Ellis is currently running a playmat crowdfunding campaign featuring his stylized treatments of the iconic companions we all love to hate, or hate to love, featuring Lurrus, Giganta, and Gyruda. It also includes a token pack featuring all new art from Steve that you won't want to miss. Get in before it ends on March 5th, 2025. And if you're one of the first people to support, there are free random artist proofs for the first 150 backers. This exists on a platform called BackerKit, not Kickstarter, and we'll have a referral link in our description of this video or podcast, depending on how you're consuming this media.
So we were talking about Lurrus. There's actually a card in this set that I was more excited about for Pauper and Vintage Lurrus. That would be Grimbauble. For 1 black, you get an artifact. When this artifact enters, target creature an opponent controls gets -2/-2 until end of turn. And then you can pay 2 and a black, so 3 mana total, sacrifice this artifact, surveil 2. This card to me was a lot more interesting. Yeah, it's not good against Mono White Initiative in Vintage, but it's very good in the Lurrus Mirror, because 1 mana is really more efficient when you're trying to, win those Orcish Bowmaster wars or clear their Lurrus. And the fact that you can customize your cards on top of your deck and sculpt, I think matters quite a bit. And if you don't want something, or if you want something for the Lurrus, you can surveil it and then bring it back. So there's a lot that you can do there. It's also an artifact for Mox Opal, which if you're a Paradoxical Outcome deck, you can pick this up. It helps with Metalcraft. I think that's pretty interesting. It's going to see play in Pauper. It's another thing that you could sacrifice to Deadly Dispute, which I think is great. And then I even had some thoughts about it for Legacy. You guys might not believe me, but there was a time period where Legacy Storm, primarily Ad Nauseam Tendrils, ran Disfigure in the sideboard. This card is Disfigure that can help you sculpt, because part of the problem was playing Fatal Push or Disfigure. You'd answer their thing and then you're like, okay, well, I boarded out a Preordain for this card. Now I can't find Infernal Tutor. Well, this thing can theoretically do that. Or if you're playing it in a Mox Opal shell, helps with Metalcraft. I think the odds you see this are pretty low, but the potential's there. Portable Hole sees some fringe play. This could too.
Yeah, the Metalcraft aspect of this, the pick it up from Paradoxical Outcome aspect of this, that's a lot of bonus. The second Deadly Dispute, a lot of bonus on this. We have seen Deadweight played in Vintage Lurrus before. That's the single black aura that gives the equipped or enchanted creature -2/-2. And Deadweight has the upside of just putting itself in the graveyard. You -2 the Bowmaster or the Lurrus, and then the aura dies, because that's how auras work, and it's just ready to refire. Where Grimbauble does take another 3 mana to get back into your graveyard. It's a little slower, but it does come with the extra. And yeah, I think we're going to want to see artifact synergy in a deck that wants this over something like Deadweight or you called out Fatal Push. Like, why are we doing this instead of Fatal Pushing? It takes a lot of synergy to get to that point. Once again, those Lurrus end games, kill a creature at Surveil 2 is really solid. And compared to Momentum Breaker, especially for the Lurrus mirrors, choosing what dies matters a lot. You said Orcish Bowmaster, that's one of the premier threats in something you fight over in the Lurrus mirrors, and each opponent sacrifices a creature is not very good against Orcish Bowmaster. But -2/-2 target creature is.
So the next one is one that I hadn't actually seen before these show notes. Marauding Mako. 1 red for a 1/1 Shark Pirate. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards, put that many +1/+1 counters on this creature. And it has cycling for 2 mana. This is an uncommon, so this is not for Pauper. What are people doing with this? I haven't seen this yet.
Well, Faithless Looting is a card that is legal in Modern and Legacy. Hollow 1 is a card that's legal in Modern and Legacy. Various Root Wallas are legal in those formats as well. Burning Inquiry is legal in those formats. Vengevine, in Legacy, you get the Angie's Ravager and the Lion's Eye Diamond to supercharge it. In Modern, the deck's a little slower, but people were already playing Hollow Vine again in Modern because of the Faithless Looting unban. And now that Orcish Bowmaster exists, which it didn't last time we could play Hollow Vine, Burning Inquiry has some extra sauce on it. If your opponent's taking 3 and you're getting a giant orc army, every time you decide to randomly redistribute cards, big upside. And those decks have been playing the Flame Wave Adept. There's a 1 mana 1/2 that every time you discard a card, it gets +1/+0 and menace until end of turn. They've been playing that since the deck was formed, and this card is better than that card. So we can have a critical redundancy of 1-drops, or we could just replace some of the bad ones. Some of the lists were playing Nethergoyf, which is something that has graveyard synergy as well as really likes having graveyards full of things. Another 1-drop. This is probably better than Nethergoyf if we're going for critical redundancy, and it probably replaces the other one, the temporary one, the Adept, next to Nethergoyf if we're just going for the best creature. There's a lot to do with this thing.
This sounds sweet. This is absolutely my jam.
Yeah, I'm surprised you hadn't seen this one already. I would have thought you recorded 3 leagues with it already.
No. Sometimes you miss stuff in spoiler season.
I wanted this card to be a common so badly, you have no idea.
You're a sick individual.
The next card is Radiant Lotus. For 6 mana, you get a artifact with tap, sacrifice 1 or more artifacts, choose a color. Target player adds 3 mana of the chosen color for each artifact sacrificed this way. This is one of the big chase mythics of the set. I've seen people brewing with it in both Modern and Legacy. In Legacy, it's more in the Tony Scaponi style decks where you have, Grim Monoliths and things like that, and you're untapping the One Ring and all sorts of stuff. They're using it as another mana engine in those Coveted Jewel style decks. I'm not sure if this card is ultimately going to make the cut, but I've seen people trying it. Where I have seen it be a little bit more interesting is in Modern, where people are building KCI at home style decks. With Cart Clan Ironworks being banned, they're using this as a way to sacrifice things to end up creating the KCI loops with Scrapwork Trawler and then winning that way. 6 mana is a lot, and Underworld Breach is legal right now. I think Modern will open up once Underworld Breach or Mox Opal eventually get banned. It's going to be one of them again, but I don't know if this is real or not, but people are experimenting.
Yeah, I think this card, this was one of those ones where if you're on social media, the Commander players were just peeing their pants when this came out. Like a lot of OMG what tweets where there's just no other context, the best comment creator interaction you could get. And my initial reaction was the eye roll of like, oh, here's another 6 mana pile of shit that Commander players are excited about. But the reality of this doesn't enter tapped. It is not bound by any limits other than how much material you have. And you do have to respect any card that could make more mana than it costs, at least a little bit. Even if it takes 6 to get this ball rolling, this 6 could quickly become 24 in the right deck. And then you're doing whatever.
A more interesting card, at least to me, is Repurposing Bay. It is basically blue birthing pod. It costs 2 and a blue for an artifact. You pay 2, sacrifice another artifact. Search your library for an artifact with mana value equal to 1 plus the artifact that you sacrificed's mana value. Activate only as a sorcery. So there's obviously no Phyrexian mana, but in Vintage, with the restriction of Urza's Saga, this card fits a interesting role because you could sacrifice some artifact like a Manifold Key, and then you go get Time Vault. So if you're playing multiple keys, this card is even better, and this is a card that rewards you for playing a bunch of keys. So if you want to play Time Vault combo in Vintage, Repurposing Bay finds the whole combo on its own. And people are already playing really bad Oswald Fiddlebender decks, which Phil probably would die for.
Yeah, nope, been there.
Yeah, exactly. And then I know for a fact that I have a donation deck coming from somebody brewing this in Legacy right now. I think Repurposing Bay was a card that a lot of people were excited for in spoiler season, and then nobody's been talking about. And I think this card has real sustainable potential. Like, this could be a card that sees a lot of play over the next 10 years.
Yeah, so you called out Oswald Fiddlebender, who has the same rules text as Repurposing Bay. Oswald is a grizzly bear that does it for a white, where this is a artifact that does it for 2 colorless. Then they do the same thing. And one critical thing about playing this card in Vintage compared to Oswald Fiddlebender is that 3 mana value. Once again, looping back to Lurrus. And you need a good reason not to play Lurrus in formats where she's legal. And in Vintage, as far as I'm concerned, those reasons are Golgari, Grave Troll, Bolas' Citadel, and Atraxa. And Repurposing Bay is not one of those 3 things I just said. So, like, it would take some sort of different brew taking its own unique path. Like, this doesn't slot into jewel shops, knocks your Lurrus out of an Oswald Turbo Key deck. EO doesn't really want a card like this. Phil talked about, unrelatedly, that synthesizer thing that cranks out constructs when you cast 3 mana artifacts. This has the same mana cost as that, 2 and a blue, and it triggers it. Maybe we got something there. I don't know. Maybe there's like a blue shops deck that wants access to this, and it cranks its way kind of like a Golos style engine or a Inventor's Fair kind of engine towards the end game. I don't know. I'm open to it. Rolling out Lurrus for a card that we already have access to as a different card that Lurrus can play with is, I think, a hurdle to me on this one breaking through. At least in Lurrus formats. Legacy, wide open.
Brian, I think I'm going to point out something that's really obvious, but gives it the boost that it needs to be better than Oswald. It's not a white creature. It is a blue artifact. And when I play Vintage, when I was actually playing Doomsday, preparing for Eternal Weekend, I cared so much about my blue count. This helps that blue count. So that way you have enough blue cards to have Force of Will, Force of Negation to stop jewel shops. Like, that's something I care about because all of your broken mana takes up so many slots in your deck that you really do value the blue cards, which is why Lorien Revealed and stuff sees play. So maybe that gets it over the hump. I'm not sure, but I am a believer in this card.
I can't wait to see what you do with it.
So we didn't put it on the list, and I don't even remember the name of this card, but I think it's an uncommon. There is an uncommon affinity creature that is blue now. It's something like a 3/4 flyer. I saw that with Experimental Synthesizer earlier today. And if you are like wanting to be a blue artifact deck, probably in Legacy, there's a surprising number of blue artifacts now that can pitch to your Force of Wills and Force of Negations if you're trying to keep up with the 50% combo metagame that we are currently living in.
You said it was a blue creature?
Yeah, I think it's an uncommon like 3/4 flyer or something like that.
Memory Guardian, 4 and a blue, affinity for artifacts, flying 3/4.
Yeah, so obviously not a Legacy playable card by itself, but if you are, building up affinity, if you are triggering synthesizers, maybe you can make that work. I have unironically played Sojourner's Companion and Friends in Legacy before and probably will again.
There's another affinity card from Aetherdrift that I saw some hype around when it was spoiled, and then nobody's talked about it since. Voyage Home. For 5, a white and a blue, affinity for artifacts, draw 3 cards and gain 3 life. You could play 12 cast, Phil. 12 cast.
I look forward to all of the Orcish Bowmaster triggers.
Yeah, that is a pretty sick one, especially since actual traditional affinity, as far as it still exists in modern, does tend to be a blue-white deck. And like Dispatch and some other cards from history would want you to lean white with that style of deck. It's pretty cool. I have seen that Leyline Axe from MTG Foundations is starting to show up in Affinity and 8-cast style Stompy builds. And the critical mass might be here again. Something as powerful as Affinity, we have to think about, if they're putting the words Affinity for artifacts on cards again, what can we do with the old busted shell that has messed up multiple formats in history?
All right, side tangent for a second. One of my opponents opened up on the Leyline Axe, and it took me a very long time to try to figure out what was going on there. I was like, is Mox Opal synergy? Is there a broken creature that's going to kill me in one shot? What's happening here? And it was just a deck that was trying to get affinity for its thought casts and thought monitors and friends.
Yeah, and slapping a Leyline Axe, which grants trample and double strike on a Patches O'Houlihan or a Kappa Cannoneer, there's your busted creature that's going to one-shot you. That deck's pretty cool. I don't know if it's good. Orcish Bowmaster's still out there causing problems, but if we're going to patchwork automaton people, might as well carry an axe.
I mean, people hate Orcish Bowmasters, but I do not miss 8-cast. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. And you could still play it. And the pivot from playing all 8 casts to just playing the 4 thought casts in a blue Stompy deck with Patchwork Automaton and Kappa Cannoneer, get it done. They've adjusted to Bowmaster. They're still out there doing it. You could play Legacy competitively without any reserveless cards in your deck, thanks to that deck.
And before we get into the tail end of this podcast, we're talking about a whole bunch of really sweet ideas here. And if you want to see what we're all cooking with, check out our Moxfields. Moxfield is sponsoring this podcast, and we absolutely love them. All the crazy decks that we are talking about, you'll be able to check them out on there. And it is just easily the best deck building website that's out there. I use it for all of my content as well as my personal decks, like my EDH decks.
And they have a cool considering function. So if you're considering stock up, maybe you could also consider Brain Surge, and you could consider pieces of the puzzle and all the things we talked about. Maybe you could consider all these new 1 and 2 mana baubles and trinkets for your Luris deck. And you don't have to remember they exist. They'll be right there waiting for you when you open your deck.
All right, so for the final section of this podcast, we just want to take a couple of minutes and look at Legacy as it is developing now. The format, kind of at a quick glance, might feel a little stale, a lot of the same as we've been seeing in the past, but there is some kind of neat stuff going on at the periphery, with Malevolent Rumble in lands being a pretty noticeable piece of tech that is picking up, including, I believe, back-to-back challenge wins last weekend.
Yeah, somebody figured it out. Malevolent Rumble, I'll read this one for the folks who don't know it, even though it's been out for a little while now. It's from Modern Horizons 3. It's a common sorcery for 1 and a green. Reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You may put a permanent from among those cards into your hand, put the rest into your graveyard, create a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn that you could sack for a colorless. This card is in most of the top decks in Modern right now. The rate on this is outrageous. This kind of snuck under us, I think. I don't remember this being any of the buzz when Modern Horizons 3 came out. I guess we had other problems at the time, but I have seen a reasonable take that this might be too good for Modern, which I don't think I agree with, but somebody with a sound head on their shoulders and who I happen to know was contracted to work on Modern Horizons 3 thinks that this card might be bannable in Modern. And that's a pretty big shot to take. If you build your deck with permanents, this is at base Impulse, but then you're spotted the mana. So it's like 1 mana Impulse, and the cards go to the graveyard where you can use them. And a deck like this Lands deck that won the 2 challenges this past weekend, if you look at 3 lands and a Life from the Loam, you just get the best land there, and now Loam's in your graveyard. And it's not even land, it's permanent. You could grab that Exploration, grab that Mana Bond, grab an Elvish Reclaimer. I don't even know if all those cards are in the deck, but I'm just naming cards. It's completely bonkers. It frequently also just creates Delirium by itself in the shells that care about that, because it is a sorcery and you're going to mill over some other stuff. This card is really good, and it seems like Legacy players are starting to figure it out, because not only is this Rumble lands out there, somebody got 9th on Tiebreakers. It's actually a member of the Bosch and Roll Discord. Shout out to Lil Nebstar, who got 9th in one of the challenges with 4-color Yorian Beanstalk featuring 4 Malevolent Rumble.
So I have been playing Malevolent Rumble off and on in various lands decks for a little while, and I've been pretty impressed by it. In addition to the stuff that you've been talking about, I think it's very neat that Malevolent Rumble returns any permanent. And in the context of lands decks specifically, a lot of times when you're dredging with Life from the Loam, you're doing so to get lands. But at the same time, you're often like, fuck, if I could just get an exploration here, this would just be so, so strong. And Malevolent Rumble being able to fill your lands with graveyards for later, maybe even hit the Life from the Loam while giving you looks at your exploration, that has been very, very good for me. The deck, as I last saw it constructed, is on a 3-3 split of Life from the Loam and Malevolent Rumble, because both of those effects are good, but you maybe don't want to max out on either. And I have really liked the 2-mana gas cards in lands, your various Mulch, Life from the Loam, Malevolent Rumble effects. And it feels like Malevolent Rumble does some really important stuff. It also occasionally can hit like some sideboard cards that you bring in and give you extra hits at hitting something like, I don't know, a Fairy Macabre or a Ghost Vacuum. And then like if you hit a Ghost Vacuum or something, you could get the immediate mana to play it. Like, seeing the card in action, I have been very impressed by Malevolent Rumble.
That is something that I've seen a lot of in Modern, Phil, is people adjusting their sideboard cards for Malevolent Rumble. Instead of playing something like Nature's Claim, you sideboard Boseiju, because Boseiju can be found off of Malevolent Rumble. When we look at this first place deck list by Sprouts, the entire sideboard, outside of very few cards, is found by Malevolent Rumble. There's 1 Dismember and 3 Force of Vigor. Every other card is found by Malevolent Rumble. That is just good deck building, including 2 copies of Twin Shot Sniper, which it's funny because the deck list on Goldfish is Gruul Lands because it has the Twin Shot Snipers in there. But this is basically just mono green. It's mono green plus 2 answers to Magus of the Moon. Like, this is just good deck building in my opinion. I do like Malevolent Rumble a lot. It's funny. I remember when the Faithless Looting Mox Opal Unbanned happened, there was a prominent pro who tweeted, "Great, now we can all quit pretending that Malevolent Rumble is playable." And I feel like it wasn't even near its hype at that point, because now it's everywhere. And people have realized you can't unlearn how good something is once you start playing with it. It's also being a menace in Pauper right now. The Golgari Glee deck, Rumble finds both halves. It's actually insane, and it digs super deep to do so in a format without tutoring. Rumble is a really good glue card, and once you realize how powerful the spawn is, there's no going back.
Yep. And of course, it is a linchpin in Temur Breach, which is a deck that is certainly going to get a ban in the next Modern ban update. And I like the strength of this thing. I had a coaching session recently with someone who was trying to learn Breach, and they were playing really slowly. Like, they were afraid to Malevolent Rumble or thinking they need to go off with every piece ready. And I'm just like, cast Malevolent Rumble. And if it hits Breach, you probably win here, because you get the mana back right away. You play the Breach, each Rumble functionally costs green, and it replaces itself +1 for Breach purposes for the exiling 3 cards. Like, Rumble plus Breach, and you can Rumble into Breach. You could probably find a win from like 3 or 4 mana if you have a Rumble in your graveyard and have a Breach. It's pretty busted the way it just shreds through a deck.
Yeah, I've definitely done that a number of times.
I believe it.
It's very good.
Some other quick news. I mean, we're about at the end of the episode here, but Non-Breakfast Nadu showed up and won a challenge. It's been months since anyone heard a peep out of that deck. And the original fears from the last ban update of Nadu's just going to run away with the format now do not seem to be founded. I was concerned about that, and the first couple weeks it did look like that, and then a different metagame formed, and Nadu is just sort of this quaint thing that we have access to now, I guess. I am not concerned or offended by Nadu. I wish it would kill me faster when it gets the hooks in. Like, I wish that a deck that got its A and B would actually end the game instead of fiddling for a while. Nadu does seem to have settled into a place where it could show up every few months and win a challenge, but we're not that mad about it.
Can I put on my tinfoil hat for a minute?
Oh, go nuts. I love those.
Okay. I wonder if Nadu will see more play when the Magic Online lag decreases. I just cannot physically imagine wanting to sit down and play Nadu right now. Magic Online has been experiencing some minor issues. I would like to shout out Daybreak Games. They are troubleshooting things. They are doing a great job. Like, the cards look so much crisper and are so much more readable on Magic Online now, but we're definitely in a growing pains spot. I wonder if we'll see more Nadu once the client has fully stabilized.
That is a reasonable tinfoil hat to put on. Though Legacy, as we've talked about many times, has just sort of been leaning away from click decks, even in paper. Just the decks that require more clicks. We've figured out that if we can bottleneck and decide a game by turn 2, why would we do anything else, even without Grief, even without Psychic Frog? And those are still the decks that are succeeding. So, and Nadu doesn't fit that bill. Maybe. We'll see. That is a great call, though. I know in Modern, when Nadu was legal, people were building their decks differently on Magic Online to be suboptimal, but could win in fewer clicks compared to the paper builds. So it's not unheard of. Some other quick hits, and then we'll get out of here. Grixis Delver starting to show up in Challenge top 8s, about the same rate as Is It Delver. It hasn't replaced it, but it is popping up as well. Mono Blue Tempo, top 8 at a Challenge. There are a bunch of 5.0 leagues posted, all by the same player. There's one person out there just doing it. Shout out to Yushi013, who just has literally months of posted results with this and finally has a Challenge top 8. And the big one for me, last 5 challenges, 0 Eldrazi's in top 8. There was 1 in the top 16. There were 3 in top 32s. And there was 1 event where none made top 32 at all. Eldrazi appears to suck. And obviously, Eldrazi doesn't suck, but our metagame has solved for and violently corrected against Eldrazi. And we still don't have any control decks. But if you're a control player and you think that people realize that Eldrazi is not going to win in this metagame, maybe we can just sideswipe here and beat up some of these sicko moon players with our deck full of basic lands that can never beat a Sowing Mycospawn, but boy are we good against Blood Moon. Maybe the window's open right now to take a shot.